Retrospectively, in the past 100 years, people have witnessed the progress of technology. From motorized movie cameras in 1914 to smartphones in the 21st century, technological conventions develop in quick succession and provide a great convenience for people's daily life. However, when tangled web wires obscure human vision, the real object is transformed into a picture on a screen and eventually becomes a virtual image. Based on this situation, Jean Baudrillard, a French philosopher, reveals how reality and fantasy mutually affect each other. Defined by Eco and Baudrillard, the hyperreal is a simulated reality deprived of origin, which is substituted for the authentic reality and claims to pass authentic. It represents an exalted or idealized reality. It is about a state that people could hardly distinguish what is real and what is not. Not only because a fantasy is such an exquisite imitation of reality, but it produces images that have never existed in the first place. According to Baudrillard, our contemporary world has been replaced by a copy within which we are fed stimuli, and in which questions of reality or authenticity have become redundant.
Such a problem can also be found in architecture. To be specific, it lies in the dissemination of architectural knowledge. To architects, illustration and written text were primarily used to record and describe a particular building before the modern ages. Although these recordings are nowadays believed to be inaccurate, given that there was a lack of scientific technique for architectural representation in the ancient period, those demonstrations were indeed authentic. Today, powerful computer software gives rise to a range of ways of recording and picturing architecture. The digital documentation of buildings produced by the computer is no longer the authentic imitation of reality, resulting in dissociation from the real world to the virtual world. Hyperreality can be categorized as a product of modernism. Le Corbusier, a famous modernist architect, claimed that architects need to learn from engineers, guided by logic and efficiency. To express zeitgeist, he also proclaimed that a house is a machine for living. Similarly, a hyperreal object is a machine to learn the environment with a lack of control. Traveling the world to examine architecture is not possible. However, the internet and the media provide a convenient way for them to study architecture. While on the other hand, Jean Baudrillard argues that hyperreality derives from postmodernism culture. First, hyperreality builds a bridge between different cultures, which develops globalization. At the same time, the hyperreal object contains different perceptions. Based on real, people use Photoshop and render to express their ideal architecture with their cultural backgrounds and personal experiences, which makes it possible for people to contextualize architecture with richness in meanings. As Robert Venturi, a famous postmodernist, declares that architecture should express both and instead of either or, and gray to black-white instead of black-white. To better explain the concept of hyperreality, Jean Baudrillard always refers to the Disneyland as a classic example. In Disneyland, everything such as streets and houses looks realistic. In Travels in Hyperreality, Italian theorist Umberto Eco asserts that Disneyland works in a system that enables visitors to feel that technology and the created atmosphere, having not just perfected the art of a fully staged world. In other words, the reason that people are still willing to come to Disneyland in the situation is that they know they are created based on imagination. Typically, by avoiding any forms of cultural concreteness, Disney's attraction transforms history into a flat and unhistorical manifestation. In Disney's mystery tours, villains are battled and defeated, which works as a symbolic gesture that good will eventually prevail. According to Van Wert, it all ends with the naming of AT&T, as though the entire history of communication were but an anticipation. Only being exposed to epidermal contact, the visitors finally return to the authentic world, where American culture is advertised as a utopian culture. For Baudrillard, this is how Disneyland erases time by synchronizing all the periods, all the cultures, in a single traveling motion, by juxtaposing them in a single scenario. Thus, it marks the beginning of real, punctual, and unidimensional time, which is also without depth. Former CEO of Disneyland, Michael Eisner, thought that a company like Disney should have a real presence, not only theme parks, but also office buildings, studios, and hotels. Between 1989 and 1991, 3 Disney structures designed by postmodern architect Michael Graves were unveiled to the public. One of them is the Team Disney headquarters in Burbank. Like Michael Eisner said, if a building is going to hold Disney offices, house Disney guests, or sell Disney products, it ought to feel not like a separate workspace or hotel or shop, but like an extension of Disney itself. Therefore, to realize this thought, the temple is completed with 19-foot high columns in the shape of the 7 dwarfs. This kind of design both satisfied Eisner and people's expectations toward Disney's architecture that contains elements of Disney's fictional characters. However, critic Paul Goldberger, in his assessment of the Graves Team Disney building, questioned whether the columns were less an instance of true wit than an architectural joke ordered from on high, a gesture giving mock solemnity that, by its scale and placement, becomes at the end truly solemn, which was not the idea at all. Also, Pritzker Prize-winning architect James Sterling cast aspersions on the idea of designing for Disney. He said, "It seems demeaning and trivial and somehow not profound or important. It is overly commercial." For some visitors, Disneyland is a symbol of the fairy tale world. They're consuming their fantasy of a fairy tale, not a ticket to Disneyland. For others, who are not big fans of Disney culture, Disneyland is a symbol of fashion. They have to go to Disneyland to prove they are trendsetters. The different symbols behind provide a large number of consumer groups for the entity and also bring huge benefits to capitalists. To some extent, the style of Disney architecture is an expression of capitalism. Today, many people find that we are living in a world of information, while only some of them are authentic. Being real is not only about modern capitalism's desire to possess something unique. It can also bring with the spiritual and aesthetic value of tradition, whereas imitation kills those values. However, authenticity is not a homogeneous status. Yet, we should not simply celebrate authenticity or completely deny hyperreality of any kind. Instead, a more reflective, critical perspective is needed toward both hyperreality and authenticity. No matter if it is the image hyperreality or Disneyland hyperreality, they won't be combated by simply insisting one side of the point. Critical discourse between both stances should be engaged. This is the only constructive way to deal with a conundrum.